Before my first jury trial, my bureau chief called me into his office and said, "How are you going to handle your disability in front of the jury?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, the jury's certainly going to be questioning how somebody with your physical condition could actually be working at this job." And it struck me odd by the question. And I said, I wasn't planning on addressing it at all, right? I'm not looking for the jury to base their verdict on my inability to walk or to give me any special consideration or sympathy. I want them to treat me just like they would any other assistant.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Most people never have to rebuild their life from zero. And some do, and they show the rest of us what's possible. My guest today is Kenneth Kunken, and after a devastating spinal cord injury at age 20 left him paralyzed from the shoulders down, doctors gave him little hope for survival and even less for a meaningful future. And they were wrong. Ken went on to earn multiple graduate degrees. He became a successful assistant district attorney. He built a beautiful family and now shares his story through his memoir called I Dream of Things That Never Were. We talk about resilience, identity, refusing other people's limits, and how purpose can be built even after life changes in an instant. So if you need a reminder that the human spirit is stronger than circumstance, this one delivers. Ken Kunken, thank you so much for being here today on this Joyful Rebellion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me as your guest.
You've got a really inspiring story that starts about a half century ago, and it wasn't a happy story when it began. You were in college, and something happened that changed the trajectory of your life, and that type of thing is something I talk to people about every week, whether it's something that happened to them, whether it's something that happened to someone really close to them, like a parent at an early age, and it changed the trajectory of their life. Everyone I speak with tends to have that moment in their life that changed things, and they can go back to it and point a finger at it and say, this is where things got a little different from the way I thought they would be. And I want to talk about yours today. So why don't you take us back to 1970 at Cornell University?
Okay, well, at 1970, I had just started my junior year at Cornell University. I was majoring in industrial engineering and operations research, and I was playing on Cornell's lightweight football team. It was a league where you were smaller than the heavyweights, obviously, and it gave you the opportunity to play ball against people that were closer to your own size. So I was playing in a game against Columbia University, and on a kickoff, I ran down the field, tackled the ball carrier, and when I did, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. And as a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed below the shoulders.
So you were, what, 19?
I was 20. I was 20.
You were 20 at the time. At 20, did you know what was going on, and were you conscious of it on the field, or was it when they took you off the field or maybe days later?
Well, I was conscious the whole time, but I had no idea what was going on. I felt like an electric shock shooting through my body. I went completely numb, and I didn't know what was happening. I mean, I'd never really heard of a spinal cord injury before. My injury was almost 25 years before Christopher Reeve's injury. Now, Christopher Reeve's injury shed a lot of light on spinal cord injuries, But when I was hurt, I knew virtually nothing about it. So I had no idea what was happening to me.
Yeah. And then you got to the hospital, and then once they explained it, how did the doctors explain to you what was going on?
They really didn't explain it to me. They didn't tell me
Yeah.
much at all. I learned that I had broken my neck, but nobody really told me about it was a spinal cord injury or what to expect in the future. So I felt I was pretty much kept in the dark, and I had no idea what was taking place.
Wow. And how about your family? Did they try to get more information? Did they try to advocate, like what can be done? What was going on in that circle
Well, they were
closest to you?
obviously devastated. And when they spoke with the doctor, the head doctor at the time, he told them that I probably wouldn't survive the week. Said I'd probably die within the week. That if I were to survive, my life expectancy would be between 5 and 9 years. I would have no movement. I would not be able to do anything. I would probably end up living the rest of my life in a nursing home. And the doctor actually said to my family, if he were my son, I would just let him go.
Wow. So they're operating on that set of information and preparing for the worst. And you're over here not knowing what the heck is going on. You're not knowing that you've been given essentially a death sentence, and you're just wondering, okay, when do we get out of here?
Well, to make matters worse, unfortunately, 17 days before my injury, my grandfather died unexpectedly of a heart attack. So my family was still grieving that loss when I had my injury. And as I say, we all knew very little about spinal cord injuries. So we were kind of learning as it was going along. And when I was in the rehabilitation facility, they had put out a pamphlet describing all aspects of spinal cord injury. So I had somebody show me the pamphlet and turn pages for me because I couldn't turn pages. And it was broken down by your level of injury. I'm hurt between the fourth and fifth cervical in the neck, which is very high up. So there was a page on what type of movement I would have. And it described a little bit of biceps, but no triceps. And it went on about my movement, and it was right on point. And there was a page about where my level of sensation would be. And I could only feel now maybe 3 inches below my shoulders and up. I don't have any feeling below that. And again, it was right on point. And there was a page about how it would affect your bodily functions, how it would affect your breathing. And of course, my lung capacity is not the same as it used to be, how it would affect your bowels and your bladder, and all the bodily functions and your blood pressure. Again, right on point. And there was a page about what type of careers you may eventually be able to pursue. And the only career I saw for my level of injury would be to someday sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And I was devastated. Here I was studying industrial engineering at one of the finest colleges for engineering in the country. And now someday I may be able to sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And the more I thought about that, I thought I may not even be able to do that. This was before touch-tone phones. This was when they had rotary phones. I couldn't dial a telephone, take notes, or write anything. I started to think I may not even be able to do that. And when I was in the rehab facility, most of the other patients that I met who had spinal cord injuries had more movement than I had, and yet didn't seem to be doing much with their lives. Fortunately, that's changed a lot in the last 55 years. But I looked at my roommates and I looked at that magazine and I thought my future looked very bleak.
And wow, at 20 years old also. And at that point, you didn't have any of the other information that your family had.
No, they didn't tell me anything either.
Right. Because they were protecting you because they didn't know how long they had with you at that point. My goodness. So you're already, you got a traumatic injury. You're trying to recover to the point where they'll release you. You're getting all of this information all of a sudden, and it's not looking good. It's definitely not the way you would want things to go. At what point was it in your building back to be able to get where you wanted to go, or get yourself around to places and to get yourself to where you felt better about what was, I guess, the normal, the everyday? How long did that take for you?
It took years. It took
Yeah.
years. But what happened was, following my injury, my family was very encouraging and very supportive. And they kept trying to reassure me that while I had a significant physical injury, my mind was still intact. And they kept encouraging me to make the most of it that I could. And there was a vocational counselor at the Rusk Institute, where I was a patient, who encouraged me to go back to school and get a good education. Her name was Joyce Mesh. And through her help, I was able to go back to Cornell University. So I spent 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers. I was out of the rehab center just 11 days before I returned to Cornell, and I resumed my studies.
Reading your bio, your studies changed quite a bit. Tell me what brought that on.
It was just clear industrial engineering was not a viable field for me. I mean, I had difficulty studying engineering at Cornell before my injury, but now it was infinitely more difficult. There were no laptop computers back then. So doing anything in engineering seemed really difficult. But I had taken an elective in psychology, and my psychology professor took an interest in me and suggested that I pursue a career in counseling. He thought I could help people by working as a counselor. So I stayed at Cornell following my graduation from engineering, and I went on and I earned a master's degree there in counseling and student personnel administration. And then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, where I earned my second master's degree. This was in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field. And I suppose I was fairly confident that now that I had 2 degrees from Cornell, 1 from Columbia, 3 prestigious Ivy League degrees, 2 master's degrees, that I shouldn't have much difficulty finding a job. Well, boy, was I wrong. In fact, even when I started my second master's, my advisor there told me that I'd have a real difficult time finding a job, despite what they were teaching in rehab counseling. Well, I had to look for a job for a year, and I mailed out, this was before email, more than 200 resumes, and nobody would hire me. I was even turned down when I offered to volunteer my services. But finally, I found one organization willing to give me that opportunity. That organization was Abilities Incorporated, which was part of what was then called the Human Resources Center. It's now called the Viscardi Center, after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr., and they're located on Long Island, and they hired me to work as a vocational and rehabilitation counselor for other individuals with disabilities. And that really changed my life.
And when you got into that role and you did start helping people, what was that like for you?
It was great. I mean, I started working there in 1977. So I had been injured for 6.5 years by then. And during that time, I had received so much help from so many different people. Now, for the first time, I had the opportunity to help others. And what a great feeling that is, to be able to give back to the community and help others. And that really changed not only my life, but how I looked at myself. It increased my self-esteem, my feelings of self-worth, and my self-confidence. It really made a huge difference.
And in those days, what kind of people were you seeing? What was a typical day looking like for you back then?
Well, I was working with people well, other people had spinal cord injuries, but who had a lot more movement than I did. Working with people with all different types of physical disabilities. Some were born with them, some were amputees, some had other types of disabilities, but it was virtually everybody with a physical disability. And once again, I think I was more severely disabled than any of the people I was counseling.
Yeah, and that makes me curious why, or if it was just the times. But it seems like you had a superpower in that respect of a client or a patient comes in and they start to know a little bit about you, and they can see that you're in a chair, and they, I would imagine, would feel a little bit like, okay, I'm about to get some real either advice or some real empathy here from this person, and it would put them at ease. And it's curious why so many other companies didn't see that as an asset.
Well, again, this was very different times. This was
Yeah.
well before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. So you didn't see many people out in public that used wheelchairs, let alone an electric wheelchair. There were no facilities that were wheelchair accessible. I mean, you couldn't even go cross the street because there were curbs. So you rarely saw somebody with my type of disability. So as a result, most people just assumed that because of the disability, he would never be able to work or do anything productive. And people also seem to assume if you have a physical disability, you may be intellectually impaired as well.
Mm, got it. So there's that just assumption of that carryover from one type to the other. Did you ever get a sense, because you can't be in the room with maybe some of your colleagues at the same time you're working with people, did you ever get a sense that your patients and people who came to see you were having slightly different outcomes than people who were going to see an able-bodied person right down the hall from you?
You know, it's interesting. While we dealt with mostly physical disabilities, there was one day that somebody wandered into our center who had some type of mental breakdown and was basically hallucinating, didn't seem to know what was going on. And of course, when our secretary saw him, they decided he needed to speak to a counselor, and they brought him in to speak with me. And as soon as this person saw me, he looked at me in surprise, and in his only lucid moment of the day, looked at me and said, "He's in worse shape than I am." So, you know, I think everybody felt a little taken aback that here I was, more physically limited than everybody else, and I was trying to help other people. But I was told that during that time, as well as later, that it helped inspire them to try and do more with their lives when they saw what I was doing.
Yeah, because you weren't quitting. And speaking of not quitting, you didn't stay in that space and ride out the rest of the career. You got the itch to go back to school somewhere in there, right?
I Well, what happened is they kept expanding my role and my responsibilities at the center. And they had me speak before many groups and organizations concerning non discrimination and affirmative action for people with disabilities. And often after my talks, I would be asked questions. And while I would do my best to answer them, I was always careful to caution the questioners they should really consult with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, you know, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. And at the time, I had a brother who was working as a lawyer, and I used to watch him in court and think this looked really interesting. So I decided to leave my job, and I went to Hofstra University School of Law. But I might add also, it was very strange for me speaking to all these groups because before my injury, I always thought of myself as a bit of an introvert. You know, I would sit in the very back of a large lecture, never raise my hand, hope nobody would notice me, and kind of blend in with the crowd. Well, yeah, I no longer blended in with the crowd when I'm in an electric wheelchair. And suddenly I'm in a position where I have to rely on my voice and speak up. And it was quite an adjustment to make that way as well.
Yeah. And when you got to law school, what were campuses like? Because you described what just general cities were like getting around, and curbs and things like stairs. And if you're going to a campus that's of any age whatsoever, it's going to have some of the same things. So, what was actually getting around from class to class
Well, let
like?
me go back and tell you what it was like at Cornell. When I went back to Cornell, there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. And it was on a very hilly terrain. So virtually every one of its buildings had steps in front of it. One of my classes, which met 3 times a week, had 16 steps in front of it. And my dorm room was located in a building that had 10 steps just to get in. On my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. So that's what it was like at Cornell. In fact, I'm the first quadriplegic to ever graduate from Cornell, and the first quadriplegic to ever earn a graduate degree there as well. But fortunately, when I went to Hofstra, they were well set up for people in wheelchairs. And a lot of that was thanks to Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr., the person who hired me at the Viscardi Center, because he played a major role in helping make that campus accessible.
That's great. So that folds into the other question I wanted to ask you. We'll get back to law school and the reasons for that, but just as an aside, what has gotten better since the mid 70s, since that time where you had to be pulled up and brought down stairs on the campus, looking 50 years on, what has gotten better in general?
Most things have gotten better. I
Okay.
visited Cornell a number of times since. They now have ramps throughout the campus. They have curb cuts throughout the campus. They even have an accessible bus traveling throughout the campus. They even have a disabled students office there. But more people are attuned to people not only going back to school for higher education, but also getting jobs and employment. And you see more and more people now with disabilities working in all types of professions. So it's all gotten a lot better. Public transportation has gotten a lot better. Now there are accessible buses and trains and even taxis. There are some that are accessible. You didn't have that 55 years ago. Now, laptop computers I can use, right? With my limited movement, I can actually move the mouse and work a laptop computer. So technology has gotten better. Unfortunately, some people in our government do not seem to be encouraging people with disabilities to do more with their lives than they can. And for some reason, they seem to have a negative impression of diversity, equity, and inclusion that I think helps a lot of people, whether you have a disability or not. Just the fact that everybody gets included now in the workplace makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And when did that policy come on? You mentioned the ADA came out well after your accident. And then when did the DEI
Well,
stuff start coming out?
For years, you heard for either whether it be affirmative action or other policies to try and include more people, not just in the workplace, but in higher education. So that was a gradual process. But the negative impression of DEI seems to be more recent with the current administration.
And it seems that's because of some of the other populations that are kind of lumped into the DEI discussion, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's no reason to exclude any group from that. They should be included. And I think it helps a lot of people when they either go to school with, live next to, or work with somebody who's very different than they are. It's a great learning process for everyone. And I think it's a win-win for who's ever involved in it.
When you got the inspiration to go into law school, what was the thought there? What types of people did you want to help with that degree?
Well, I thought I would go into some type of advocacy law where I could help other individuals with disabilities. help change some of the laws to, follow up on the Americans with Disabilities Act, make facilities even more accessible, make employment for everybody, more available and accessible. But what happened was, while I was in law school, through my brother's suggestion, I actually did an internship at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. And I really loved that experience, so much so that I decided that's where I'd like to work full time. So at the beginning of my third year of law school, I applied for a full-time position with the District Attorney's Office. And I was fortunate that the district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, placed his hiring decision on my abilities rather than my disability. And he hired me to work as an assistant district attorney. And I absolutely loved working there. But let me tell you a little bit about how I started there. I mean, for one, that gave me the opportunity to help victims. So I was still in a position where I wanted to help others, certainly, and felt that I was doing that. But when I started at the DA's office, first, obviously, I had finished 3 years of law school at the standard 3-year time period. I passed a very difficult New York State bar exam the first time that I took it. I began my work by participating in a very intensive 4-week training program where they taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. And I was so proud to go to court my first day, only to find I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom. They were too narrow to allow me to get through in my electric wheelchair. I couldn't believe it. After all of that work and preparation, I still couldn't fit through the doorways of the courtroom. So the Americans with Disabilities Act helped with that as well, but that came later. I started my job in 1982 there. The ADA came in contact in the early 1990s.
Mm. Wow. So what happened there when you couldn't get through the doors? What was the solution to get you where you needed to be?
They eventually had one, take off the swinging doors, take off the hinges, and widen a lot of the doorways. And that took a while, but they eventually did that. I might add that my first assignment happened to be in our traffic court bureau, which was located on the second floor of a neighboring building. And when I started there, the elevator was broken. So I had to be carried up and down in my electric wheelchair just to get into the courtroom there. That's how I started. In fact, I got my first promotion in the DA's office because the elevator was broken and they didn't know when it would be fixed. So they transferred me to our district court bureau. So that may be the only time it's actually worked in my favor to have an architectural barrier like that.
How about that? When you were able to start helping people with your new degree, because you got the psychology degrees to help people, and now you've got a couple of psychology degrees and a law degree, so you've got a little different insight than most attorneys. How did those two fold together to give you an edge that some of your colleagues didn't?
I think it helped a lot. One, speaking to victims and speaking to witnesses, it gave me a better idea of how to approach people, how to deal with people, and not only recognize what they were going through, but what their concerns were and how I could talk to them and address them. It also opened me up more to appearing in public and speaking before groups. And I think that helped a lot as well. And it was just a gradual maturing process to look at myself more as a professional than as somebody who not only happened to have a disability, but was so severely limited by it that I couldn't rise up and overcome it. But it also taught me how to speak without notes in front of me. Since I was not able to take notes, from years and years of schooling and practice, I developed the ability to talk without notes. And that helped a lot in my job.
Yeah, you would have completely different skill sets than other folks. And that is something, tell me if I'm wrong, would start bringing more confidence back. taking you from that day where you read that your only possible job opportunity could be selling magazines over the telephone, and now you're helping people in court. Did you ever look back on that and think, okay, I did some cool stuff. I set myself up pretty well given the circumstances?
I've looked back on it a lot, and I had very mixed feelings. One, I was fortunate that through a lot of help I received from family and friends, I was able to get past most people's limited expectations and do more than people expected I'd be able to do. Because you got to realize a lot of people's performance rises or falls based upon what others expect of them. It's so important to keep your expectations high, not only for yourself, but for others, to help everybody do well. So that made a big difference. In addition, when I saw a lot of individuals at the rehab facility who were not working at the time, it just really hit home that if they had the right encouragement, support, and expectations from others that there was more they could do, I think they would have done more with their lives as well. So I was very fortunate in that respect. I might add that in the district attorney's office, when you leave the job, we go through what they call an exit interview, where you talk to the person in personnel about what you like best about the job and what you thought could be improved. And I was later told by their personnel director that many people during their exit interviews said one of the best parts of their job was meeting, working with, and getting to know me. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is, one, obviously it was very flattering to hear that. But what they were really saying is meeting, working with, and getting to know someone with a significant disability. Because unless they had a close relative with a disability, most people never came into daily contact with somebody with a disability. And they said that that helped inspire and motivate them to do a better job and to do more with their lives. And I really appreciated, one, hearing that, but two, knowing that somebody could make a big difference if they're given that opportunity to make a difference, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of others.
So you were a next layer of inspiration, not just to the people you were helping, but the people you were around in general. And I want to talk about that because a lot of times I'm talking to someone and their specific situation doesn't apply to maybe someone listening to this episode right now. But maybe that person who's listening, it may not be the similar disability. And I've talked to enough folks who have either been caregivers for either children with disabilities or had those disabilities themselves. And they say that one of their biggest complaints about just interactions in general is people don't tend to hold them to a high standard because they make assumptions.
Right. Absolutely. Let me just give you another example. Before my first jury trial, my bureau chief called me into his office and said, "How are you going to handle your disability in front of the jury?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, the jury's certainly going to be questioning how somebody with your physical condition could actually be working at this job." And it struck me odd by the question. And I said, I wasn't planning on addressing it at all, right? I'm not looking for the jury to base their verdict on my inability to walk or to give me any special consideration or sympathy. I want them to treat me just like they would any other assistant. And I did my best to make sure that they did that. And I think when more people see beyond the disability and treat you as a person just like anybody else, it makes a huge difference for everybody in dealing with others and treating them just as they would any other individual, no matter what differences they have.
Do you have some advice for people who maybe are really timid and don't know what to say, don't want to feel awkward, and in one, holding the bar high and having high expectations, but at the same time not making assumptions, maybe helping people feel better about asking honest questions to say, hey, what what is possible here. I don't want to treat you like a baby, but at the same time, I don't want to throw too much at you and make you think that I don't care.
Basically it is ask questions. When you
Okay.
don't know, ask. I found the people that were most comfortable with dealing with me initially were small children. They
Mm.
had no compunction about coming up to me and asking me why I'm sitting in a wheelchair and why don't your legs work and why can't you move? And I appreciated that. A lot of parents would try and quiet their children and say, don't ask that. I was fine with that and I would encourage it. And a lot of people would get uncomfortable if they come up to me and said, look, would you like to go for a walk? And then, oh my God, I'm sorry, I forgot. And they'd immediately feel bad about what they just said. I'm fine with all that. I don't want people to treat me any differently or to be hesitant about asking me any questions. I mean, they should certainly be aware that they may not want to ask me something so personal that they wouldn't want to be asked themselves or anybody else for that matter. But for the most part, if you have a question, ask. And if I'm comfortable with my disability, they should be comfortable with talking with me and recognizing that I don't have a problem with handling it. They shouldn't have a problem with it.
It's all about that getting to know someone. Once you get to know a person beyond their abilities, beyond their skin color, beyond whatever building they walk into on a Sunday or Saturday, it's so much different. And that can start by asking questions.
Absolutely. And I might add, just like any able bodied person, people with disabilities have differences too. And what might work for me may not work for somebody else with a disability. And somebody with a disability different than mine, or even the same as mine, may feel differently about approaching certain situations or handling different topics. Everybody is different, and you need to recognize that.
I want to go back to something you mentioned because I'd love your advice or even thoughts on it. Back in 1970, years after when you were trying to figure out what normalcy looked like for you, and you had a decision, you could either do what some folks in a major life situation do and lean toward despair and lean toward some of the people you described as not really doing much with their life because they see this limitation as insurmountable. And then you chose differently. You chose a different path. You chose to rebuild at least your mind. You went, got several degrees. Now you've got a law degree. And you did pinpoint that you had a really supportive family. Your family was saying you can do all these different things. And I'm curious what you would say to someone who has been through a big trauma. They're in between that decision of going toward despair and just kind of saying, okay, this is what I am, this is who I am, this is my life now. Or going that route where they can have a really vibrant 50 plus years ahead of them if only they choose it. But not everyone has that supportive family. So if there is someone out there or someone listening who knows someone out there who without that supportive, first layer of insulation between them and life, the harsh world outside, what encouragement would you give them?
Well, obviously, it helped me a lot to have a supportive family and friends. But a part of my message would be never give up. There's always a lot people can do. Sometimes you got to sit back, reevaluate, and pause for, a period of time before you regroup and go out and handle difficult challenges. Now, I had so many naysayers in my life to say you can't do something or it's just too difficult. And what's important is not to listen to them. It's not important what others think you can do or accomplish. What's important is how you feel about yourself, what you believe you can do, and do your best to make the impossible possible. Just because somebody hasn't done something before doesn't mean you can't do it now. And I want to just for a moment mention the book that I wrote. I wrote a book about my life, and I titled it I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken story. And I got that title many years ago while I was still a patient in the rehab facility. I had been asked to testify before a United States Senate Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And it was the words on that inscription have always been very meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that's where I got the title of my book, I Dream of Things That Never Were. And that's what I tell other people when I speak with them. Just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you cannot do it now. Sometimes you need to dream of things that never were and then make them happen. And you can do that.
Well, that is an inspiration. I love it. And I wanted to dig into your book a little bit more because where we kind of left off in your life timeline, you were helping people in the district attorney's office, and you did that for a long time. So you'd spent years doing the counseling, then you moved through law school. Now you're helping people in the justice system. And you did that, what, for 40 years?
I worked full-time for 33 years and 9 months as an assistant DA, and then another 8 years part-time. So I'm now 75 years old and fully retired.
Okay. And was that when you slowed down in your career enough to say, you know what, I think I want to write a book about all of this? When you decided to write that book, I've read so many times that you need to think about who you're writing this book for. And when you started getting on the word software, who are you writing this book for?
Well, first, let me say, I started writing this book more than 50 years ago. Okay. While I was still a patient at a rehab facility, a friend of my Aunt Lorraine's by the name of Al Meglin came to visit me in the hospital. And he thought, one, it may help me deal with my depression at the time by talking to somebody about what I was going through. But he also thought it may be helpful to others to share what it is like to have a spinal cord injury and go through the rehab process. He used to come and visit me once a week while I was a patient in the rehab facility and ask me what was happening in my life. And I would dictate to him and he would try and write notes down. But then obviously I went back to school and we stopped and I started picking it up on my own. And, through a lot of difficulty with braces and splints, I was able to type really, really slowly on a IBM Selectric typewriter. And I did a little more on my own. But I had a lot of people that kept telling me I should try and share my story with others with what I've done. And obviously the best way for me to do that, other than speaking before groups and organizations, would be to continue to work on my book. But let me go into an area of my life that we haven't covered yet. And that was I was trying to make the most of my personal life as well as my professional life. And that's not easy when you're quadriplegic to think about dating and having a satisfying relationship with a woman. And as you might imagine, that poses its own unique set of challenges. But I was able to do that eventually. And while I never believed marriage would be in the picture, I never thought that would be something I could look forward to. I started to date, and I was fortunate to have met an incredible, incredible woman by the name of Anna, who's sitting just off camera to my right today. And Anna is the most absolutely incredible person that I ever met. And our relationship developed where it soon became a romantic relationship. And in 2003, Anna and I were married. And what a difference that made in my life. But James, it gets better, because when we first talked about getting married, Anna said that she wanted to have my baby, and not just a baby, my baby. She said she wanted to see a little Kunken running around our house. Now, this really seemed impossible. Think about that. At that time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. But there's a saying in the military I've always liked: the difficult we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer. Well, we were determined to make the impossible happen. So we looked into various options, including in vitro fertilization, and we're very excited to learn it still may be possible for someone in my condition to father a child. Now, keep in mind, this was more than 20 years ago, and in vitro wasn't quite developed the way it is now, but we pursued it, and through the miracle of science, Anna became pregnant. And James, I want you to think about this. On January 24th, 2005, I was present in the delivery room. Picture what this was like. I was present in the delivery room when my wife, Anna, gave birth to triplets. We have 3 incredibly wonderful sons, Joey, Jimmy, and Timmy. They're now 21 years old. They're juniors in 3 separate colleges in upstate New York. Now, they're all perfectly healthy, but triplets are always born prematurely. So they were in the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit, for a while after they were born. And I could remember visiting them in the NICU and sitting by their incubators and thinking to myself, wow, this is a story. This needs to be told. So you asked me a few minutes ago about writing the book. I looked at it, I said, now I really have to write this book. So that was a good deal of the encouragement to finish writing the book so my boys would have something to read. So with my wife's help, we sat by her laptop computer and I dictated to her the book, and I wanted my boys to read it, which not only did they do, but my son Timothy actually did the recording where I recorded it as an audio version as well.
Nice.
So it's available as a hardcover, in a Kindle version, and an audio book now.
Fantastic. That is great. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of feedback from people who have read the book. What's some other feedback you've gotten from folks you've never met before?
It was very encouraging because a lot of people have found my story inspiring, and it's helped them to do more with their lives. And obviously, I always appreciate hearing that. But when I was first hurt, I didn't know of any other role models that I could look to for hope or inspiration, or to lead me to believe that there was still a lot I could do with my life, or that I could go back to school or work. Well, now, obviously, there are a lot more people out there who you see in public who are doing a lot with their lives. And I'm hoping that perhaps I can help inspire others to do more with their lives now.
I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of on a personal note, this is someone I know. So I've been a photographer for my career. That's what I've spent the last 30, it's coming up on 35 in a year or two doing. And in the course of doing that, I have interns pretty much every year in the spring. And it was exactly a year ago I had an intern. She was 19, and we're on the East Coast here in North Carolina. And we decided to go do a portrait session in Washington, D.C. It's about a 4-hour drive up the road. And she went with her family, and her family are her siblings, her parents, and everybody. They just kind of did a caravan, made it a family vacation. So I met her for about 2 hours, and it was the day before Easter Sunday last year. And we did our photo shoot. We started at Thomas Jefferson. We ended up at Lincoln Memorial. We were with a couple whose portraits we were photographing. And I saw her and I was like, okay, we'll catch up next week and we'll download all of these pictures that she took and that I took, and we'll be in touch. So I got in my car. I drove back to North Carolina. She and her family got in their car later on, drove back to North Carolina. And then the next day, her family was going out to get some eggs for Easter. And they were rear-ended by someone who was going very fast. Her brother was sitting beside her in the back seat. He was killed, and she is now in a wheelchair with a spinal injury, and she's just turned 20, and she is learning how to live with the apparatus, all the different workflows, all the different things she has to do that she'd never done before. And I'm curious what advice you would give someone who's just beginning that journey, where they were similar age to you, something catastrophic happens, and now their life's completely different, and they have to figure out what comes next. What would be your advice to someone like that?
You know what? Obviously, it's very difficult for anybody to go through, but it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it took me years to try to adjust to my disability and not to get severely depressed. You know, what it's like to have an injury such as mine. So it's really too early in somebody's life after injury to start planning everything for the future and thinking how you're going to overcome everything. Sometimes it's a day-to-day process, and it depends where you are that particular day. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time to adjust to it, but hopefully eventually you not only adjust to it, but you do everything you can to overcome the limitations. Now, I was fortunate that I had a lot of help in making my adjustment to it, and being able to do a lot of things in my life that a lot of people couldn't do. But I can tell you, every day that I wake up and get to look at my children, it brings a smile to my face, and I feel absolutely great. I am now leading a wonderful life. I have a purpose in my life, and it's to help make sure my children develop as the most wonderful adults that they could possibly be, and help them every step of the way. And I feel very good about myself and where I am these days. It takes a while to get to that position, but I would encourage that woman to keep up her hopes as best she can, to take it one day at a time, to find her purpose in life, and eventually, hopefully, she'll get to a point where she wakes up every day with a smile on her face as well.
That's a good place to start. And what I'm hearing in that is, don't expect things to go quickly, and keep giving yourself some grace until you eventually get where you want to be, but don't expect fast movement.
Absolutely. It takes quite a bit of time. For everybody, it's different too. Everybody else has a different timeline for when that will eventually occur, but it's out there and it's doable.
I'm curious now, you've had such a full career and you've been fully retired, as you said, for a couple of years. What is next for you?
Well, you know, I've done quite a number of public speaking to try and help inspire and motivate others. And now I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts. But what's next too is enjoying my time with my wife, time I see my children when they're not away at school, you know, and helping them become the best individuals they could be, and just trying to help as many people as I can. And it's a very fulfilling life. I'm on the board of directors at the Viscardi Center, where I worked before I went to law school. I'm on the Cornell University Council, obviously, where I went to school following my injury. While I live in Nassau County, I'm a member of the Suffolk County Rehabilitation Society. So I've been staying active and just looking now forward to the nicer weather and getting outside more. And I'm proud to say, actually, one of my sons is going to Cornell now. my alma mater. So it's just great to see how my boys have developed, matured, and how well they're all doing.
That's great. And I want to really thank you for not only for being here today talking about your story, but even in retirement, as we just illustrated, you are still helping people and you really want to. And that's powerful, because anytime you can take something that objectively people would look from the outside and say, oh, that's terrible circumstance. And anytime you can turn that into something that helps other people, it just spreads light all over the world. And the great thing about light is it bounces off of things. So if you spread a little light to someone, it might give them the encouragement or inspiration to take a little bit of their light and spread it out to others as well. So I appreciate you doing that for years and years now in all of your different endeavors. And I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important to convey to someone listening right now.
Well, I'm very proud to say that 2 years ago, the current district attorney in Nassau County, a woman by the name of Ann Donnelly, started an award, an annual award. It's the only one they give annually in the district attorney's office. And she named it after me, the Kenneth J. Kunken Award, because she wanted to recognize the outstanding assistant district attorney every year who basically is exhibiting the characteristics that she felt I exhibited in my role as an assistant district attorney. So when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the district attorney felt it was so important to actually name an award after me to encourage other assistants to try and develop the work ethic that the guy in the wheelchair has, right? And I think that says a lot when you think, is it a positive or a negative to have somebody who may be so different than everybody else included in the workplace? I know our district attorney has found it to be very positive and tries to encourage other individuals to appreciate that and to learn from it. And that's part of my message is, include everybody as best you can. Don't limit yourself to who you work with, go to school with, or just become friends with. And I thought that when the district attorney hired me, it took a lot of guts on his part, because at the time, I don't think there'd ever been a quadriplegic assistant district attorney on Long Island before I was hired. And when I spoke to somebody in personnel about that, he said, it didn't take guts at all. We recognized you for your abilities and what you've done with your life. And they said, frankly, it was a relatively easy decision. I would like more people to recognize, appreciate that, and feel the same way.
That is fantastic. Thank you. And I'm on your website. It's kenkunken.com. And is that the best way for people to connect with you, get your book?
Yes, that would be the best way. And that will tell them a number of different ways where they can purchase the book or listen to the book and learn more about me.
All right. Well, Ken, thank you so much for being here today. This was a fantastic conversation. I learned a lot, and hopefully the folks listening did as well.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that.
Thanks for joining me today. If something in this episode stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Screenshot it and tag me, or DM me on the socials, send smoke signals, whatever works. I want to know what you're plotting. This show isn't just about listening. It's about building something real together. So I hope to hear from you soon, and I'll be right here next week when you're ready to keep the rebellion going.